You're doing everything right. You have a degree, a real job. You pay your bills on time. You have some kind of retirement account. You're not blowing money on stupid things. By every standard you were ever given, you are a responsible adult. And yet, you cannot afford to buy a house in the city where you work. Your student loan balance hasn't moved in years, despite making every payment. Your savings account has less in it than it did 2 years ago, even though you make more money now than you ever have. You're not failing. You're running hard on a treadmill that's moving faster than you can keep up with. And the most important part of that sentence, the part that changes everything once you understand it, is that you didn't know the treadmill was there. You just thought you weren't running fast enough. Today, we're going to show you the treadmill. Not to make you feel better about where you are, not to remove responsibility from your decisions, but because once you see the system that's been working against you, the frustration, the confusion, the quiet shame of doing everything right and still falling behind suddenly makes complete and total sense. And understanding it is the first step to actually doing something about it. If you were born between 1981 and 1996, you are a millennial. Right now, you are between 29 and 44 years old. That is not a young person's age range anymore. That is prime working years, the age where historically wealth is supposed to start compounding, where the sacrifices of your 20s are supposed to start paying off, where the financial foundation of your life gets built. And by almost every measure, your generation is failing to build wealth at the same rate as every previous generation at the same age. Not because you're lazy, not because you spend too much on coffee, not because of any personal failure, because 5 specific financial forces hit your generation at the same time, in a combination that has never happened before in modern American history, and almost nobody is talking about all 5 of them together. Here's what you grew up believing would happen. Graduate, get a job, work hard for a few years, buy a house in your late 20s, build equity, contribute to a 401k, retire comfortably somewhere in your 60s, maybe earlier if you were smart about it. That was the promise. That was the formula that worked for your parents, that worked for every generation before yours. Here's what actually happened instead. You graduated with debt. Maybe it was $22,000. Maybe it was $58,000. Maybe it was more. Whatever the number, you were told it was an investment. You were told the degree would pay for itself. Everyone you knew had loans. Your parents called it normal. The financial aid office called it manageable. What nobody told you, what the numbers actually show, is that the cost of a 4-year college degree increased by 169% between 1980 and 2020, adjusted for inflation. Meanwhile, wages for young workers grew by roughly 19% over the same period. Read that again. Degree cost up 169%. Wages up 19%. The thing you were told to buy to access the middle class got 9 times more expensive relative to what it would pay you back, and you were 18 years old when you signed for it. The average student loan balance for millennials who borrowed is $38,877. Total millennial student debt sits at approximately $1.1 trillion. And here's what that debt actually costs, not the balance, the total cost. A $38,000 loan at 6.8% on a standard repayment plan costs roughly $52,600 by the time it's paid off. That extra $14,600 in interest leaves your account over 10 years before it can do anything else for you, before it can become a down payment, before it can be invested, before it can compound. You didn't make a bad financial decision when you took those loans. You made the only decision the system offered you. And then the system changed the math without telling you. You started saving for a house, maybe at 26, maybe 28. You were doing what you were supposed to do, and for a while the goal felt reachable. In 2017, the median home price in most mid-sized American cities was somewhere between $240,000 and $310,000. With a reasonable down payment and a 4% mortgage rate, the monthly payment was tight but doable. 2, maybe 3 years of serious saving and you'd be there. Then 2020 happened. Pandemic savings flooded the housing market. Remote workers with higher incomes moved into cities that had previously been affordable. Institutional investors began buying single-family homes at scale. The Federal Reserve dropped rates to near zero, and bidding wars started on houses that would have sat on the market for months just years before. By 2022, that same house cost $410,000. Mortgage rates had climbed past 6.5%. The monthly payment nearly doubled. And your down payment, 2, maybe 3 years of genuine sacrifice, real discipline, skipped vacations, and takeout traded for home cooking, was now less than 10% of a house you could no longer afford to carry. The target moved, and it moved faster than you could chase it. First-time homebuyers now make up just 24% of all purchases in the United States. The median age of a first-time buyer is 38 years old. In 1981, it was 29. That 9-year gap is 9 years of equity you didn't build, 9 years of appreciation you didn't capture, 9 years that your parents used to build the wealth they're sitting on now. Wealth that feels increasingly like it exists in a different universe from the one you're living in. You didn't miss the housing market because you were irresponsible. You missed it because the window opened and closed before your generation had the financial footing to step through it. Here's a number most people have never seen. Economists have studied what happens to people who graduate during a recession. The data is consistent and brutal. Graduating into a bad economy doesn't just give you 1 year bad. Research from Yale economist Lisa Kahn shows that it suppresses your earnings for 10 to 15 years after graduation. Not 1 year, not 3, a decade and a half. The graduating classes of 2008, 2009, and 2010 walked into a job market with 10% unemployment. Many took jobs below their qualification level just to have income, and because salary negotiations almost always start from your previous salary, starting lower meant staying lower. Every raise was calculated off a number that was already behind where it should have been. And here's why that compounds so brutally. If you start $10,000 below where you should be, and both you and the person who graduated into a good economy received the same 3% annual raises, the gap doesn't stay at $10,000. It grows every year for your entire career. Even if you graduated in 2012 or 2013 after the worst of it, you were still entering a market in recovery, still competing against people who'd been overqualified for positions for 2 or 3 years, still starting from a base that was lower than it would have been in a different economic moment. You are still carrying the financial echo of a recession that ended over a decade ago. That's not failure, that's math. Between 2021 and 2023, inflation hit 40-year highs. It peaked at 9.1% in June of 2022. And if you owned a home with a fixed mortgage, if you had assets that inflated alongside everything else, if your cost structure was mostly locked in, inflation was uncomfortable, but your assets moved with it. If you were still in the accumulation phase, still renting, still saving, still trying to buy your first asset, inflation was devastating in a specific and precise way. The thing you were saving toward got more expensive, the money you were saving with bought less, and the interest rate hikes used to fight that inflation made mortgages unaffordable at exactly the moment you were supposed to be finally ready to buy. Inflation hit your generation at the worst possible moment, not when you had assets to protect, but when you were still trying to acquire the first one. The wealth transfer that happens during inflationary periods from people who work to people who own happened while you were still on the wrong side of that line. Now, here's the force that's different from all the others. The first 4 happened to you, external, structural, not your fault by any reasonable definition. But there is a 5th force, and this one is the only one you can actually change. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like growing up. Think about what happened as your income climbed. better apartment because you finally could, newer car because the old one kept needing work, eating out more because you earned it, upgraded phone, gym membership, a few streaming services, better wardrobe. None of it reckless, all of it reasonable, every single upgrade justified at the time. But here's what was happening underneath all of it. Every time your income went up, your monthly obligations followed right behind it. And they didn't just follow, they locked in. That apartment bills you on the first of every month, whether you feel like paying it or not. The car payment doesn't ask how your week was. The subscriptions don't check if you used them. And because each individual upgrade seemed affordable when you signed up for it, you never stopped to add up what they cost together. You never looked at the total. You just felt the squeeze at the end of each month and assumed you needed to earn more. This is the trap that compounds all the other traps, because student debt, housing prices, wage suppression, and inflation are real. They are genuinely heavy. But if the small amount that survives all of those forces also gets absorbed by lifestyle inflation before it can compound, there is nothing left to build with. Understanding this isn't about blame. It's about recognizing the one variable in this entire equation that you actually have control over. Every generation faces financial challenges. Boomers had 18% mortgage rates in the early 1980s. Gen X had the dot-com crash and then 2008. But here's what makes your situation structurally different. The five forces didn't arrive one at a time. They stacked simultaneously. Student debt before the career started, recession at the career's start, wage suppression through the 20s, housing crisis in the 30s, inflation layered over all of it. And unlike the generations before you, there is no pension waiting at the end, no defined benefit retirement plan your employer manages on your behalf, no social security system most of you fully trust to be there. You have been handed the most financially complex environment of any generation in modern history and told to navigate it entirely on your own, with financial education that was never part of your schooling, with tools that require expertise to use, and with an economy that changes the rules faster than most people can keep up with. Your parents didn't need to know what an index fund was. Their employer's pension handled it. You need to be your own financial advisor, your own retirement planner, your own investment manager, and nobody taught you how. Four of these five forces you cannot control. You cannot change what housing costs today. You cannot undo what the economy did to your starting salary. You cannot go back and enter the workforce in 2005 instead of 2009. But you can stop letting lifestyle inflation absorb every dollar that survives the other four forces. And you can start doing three specific things. First, automate your savings before lifestyle gets to decide. The reason most people in your income range don't save enough is not that they don't want to, it's that they try to save what's left after spending, and lifestyle always fills the space. Move your savings on payday, before the money lands in your checking account, before it becomes available, before it becomes your normal. Even $600 a month invested consistently at a historical average of 10% annual return becomes over $123,000 in 10 years. Not from a windfall, not from a second job, from moving money before your lifestyle claims it. Second, audit your fixed costs once a year like a business reviews its overhead. Most people set up their monthly commitments once, when they moved, when they bought the car, when they signed up for something, and then never add them up again. One afternoon, one honest look at every automatic payment leaving your account. Most people who do this find $200 to $400 a month in commitments they set up and forgot about. $300 a month redirected to an index fund is $62,000 over 10 years. You didn't suffer, you just looked. Third, stop measuring your financial health by how your life looks and start measuring it by what your money is doing. The external markers, the apartment, the car, the wardrobe, they don't compound, they depreciate. The account you're building quietly in the background, the savings rate you're protecting, the net worth trajectory you're on, that's the actual number. Everything else is performance. The silent crisis destroying millennial wealth isn't one thing. It's five things arriving at the same time, to the same generation, during the exact years when the financial foundation of a life is supposed to be built. And the cruelest part isn't the debt, It's not the housing prices. It's not the timing of the recession or the inflation. The cruelest part is that you spent years thinking it was your fault, that you weren't disciplined enough, weren't hardworking enough, weren't making the right decisions, when the truth is that you were running full speed on a treadmill you didn't know existed, built by forces that arrived before you were old enough to understand what a mortgage rate was. Seeing the system doesn't fix it overnight, but it changes how you move through it. Because once you see the treadmill, once you can name it, describe its speed, understand what built it, you stop blaming yourself for being tired, and you start spending your energy on the decisions that are actually within your control. Those decisions exist. The path through this is real, and the few people in your generation who are quietly building real wealth right now are doing it not because the system stopped working against them, but because they stopped fighting themselves at the same time. Now you know what they know. Subscribe to Aris Finance. We're here every day. See you in the next one.